Most people aren't broke because they don't earn enough. They're broke because they spend like they already won. The middle class has mastered one art, looking rich while staying average. Nice cars, shiny kitchens, vacations financed by credit. And then they wonder why compounding never shows up at their door. Let me tell you a truth you won't like. The system doesn't want you rich. It wants you comfortable, just comfortable enough to stop thinking. You buy a car the minute your salary rises. You buy a bigger house the minute your bonus hits. You think you're upgrading your life. You're really just upgrading your liabilities. The banks smile. The government collects taxes. The corporations sell you another shiny object. Everyone's getting rich except you. You see, wealth isn't about income. It's about what's left after stupidity. The middle class calls their mortgage an investment. They call their car a necessity. They call their credit card points free money. They even call their debt manageable. That's not financial literacy, that's self-delusion with paperwork. When I was young, during the Great Depression, people saved first and spent later. Today, people spend first and pray later. They've confused motion with progress. You know what happens when a nation lives beyond its means? It turns into a society of slaves not to kings, but to creditors. And the middle class is leading that parade. I've seen smart engineers, lawyers, doctors, brilliant people work 60 hours a week just to keep up with their own bad decisions. They don't own their homes. Their homes own them. They don't drive their cars. Their loans drive their choices. That's not success. That's a treadmill with marble flooring. People think the poor waste money on lottery tickets. The middle class wastes it on status symbols. The rich quietly buy assets that nobody claps for. Here's the paradox. The more you try to look rich, the longer you stay broke. The more invisible your wealth, the safer it grows. The average American can't handle boredom. They crave stimulation, even if it costs them their future. So they swipe, upgrade, refinance, and repeat. They'll spend 30 years paying for a home, but never spend 30 minutes understanding compounding. They'll know the horsepower of their car, but not the interest rate on their credit card. This isn't ignorance, it's chosen blindness. They don't want to know because knowing means admitting they've been fools. The middle class doesn't fail because of lack of opportunity. They fail because of a lack of restraint. They refuse to delay gratification, and they call that living in the moment. You don't get rich by chasing comfort. You get rich by enduring discomfort intelligently. If you need every purchase to feel justified, you'll never be free. Freedom requires saying no to most things. And the middle class can't say no, not to gadgets, not to houses, not to trends. That's why they'll stay in debt forever while telling themselves they're doing fine. The middle class doesn't need more financial advice. They need a mirror, because the biggest trap isn't the interest rate. It's the illusion that everything's okay. And when you live like that long enough, you stop noticing the bars on your golden cage. So if you want to know why the middle class stays broke, it's simple. They mistake comfort for freedom and spending for success. And both are expensive delusions. Debt is like alcohol. 1 glass feels harmless, 2 makes you social, and by the 5th, you're making stupid promises you can't keep. The middle class calls it leverage. I call it what it is, self-imposed servitude. They borrow to look successful instead of being successful. They think they're playing offense, but they're really cornered on defense, paying interest to people who are smarter than them. I've watched entire generations convince themselves that good debt exists. Let me tell you, debt is only good when someone else owes it to you. A mortgage, student loan, car loan, credit card, these are the 4 horsemen of financial mediocrity. And yet, the middle class welcomes each of them with open arms and a smile. They'll tell you, but Munger, you don't understand, it's an investment. Sure, an investment that guarantees 20 years of payments and 0 optionality. Optionality, that's what wealth really buys. the ability to walk away, to say no, to not care what the market, your boss, or the bank thinks. You can't have optionality when your life is pre-sold to creditors. The middle class has turned the word loan into a love language. They'll borrow for college, a wedding, furniture, even a vacation, and then brag about their credit score like it's a badge of honor. Let me tell you a secret. Your credit score measures how well you've played by the lender's rules. It's not a sign of intelligence, it's a sign of compliance. If the system rewards you for debt, maybe the system isn't designed for your freedom. I've seen this movie before. In 1929, Americans borrowed to buy stocks. In 2008, they borrowed to buy homes. In both cases, when the music stopped, debtors were the ones left standing without chairs. The middle class still hasn't learned. They borrow today, believing tomorrow will be richer, because hope is easier than discipline. They don't realize how fragile that is. One layoff, one illness, one market crash, and their comfortable life collapses overnight. I've never met a man who lost his house because he didn't have debt, but I've met thousands who lost everything because they had just a little too much. Debt doesn't just steal your money. It steals your calm, your time, your ability to think independently. When you owe someone money, you start filtering your decisions through fear. Fear of losing your job, fear of not making the next payment, fear of admitting you've overextended yourself. That fear quietly corrodes your judgment, and judgment is everything in investing. When you're leveraged, you can't be patient. You can't sit through volatility. You can't think long term. You can't even think straight. The middle class loves to say you have to take risks to grow. Yes, but not stupid risks. Not the kind that can wipe you out completely. You don't get rich by playing Russian roulette with borrowed bullets. The irony is they think debt is the bridge to opportunity. In reality, it's a moat around their own prison. They decorate it with granite countertops, call it a dream home, and spend the next 30 years guarding the keys. Meanwhile, the wealthy use debt like a scalpel, rarely, precisely, and only when the odds are overwhelmingly in their favor. The middle class uses it like a hammer, hitting everything that looks shiny. Debt isn't evil. It's just a test. And most people fail it. They fail because they crave the shortcut. They think they can borrow their way into a lifestyle their discipline hasn't earned. That's the real middle class trap. They confuse credit with capital, and they'll spend decades learning the difference the hard way. Remember this: if you need to borrow money to look successful, you've already failed the test, because true wealth is silent, slow, and self-funded. The moment you need other people's money to maintain your image, you're not building freedom, you're renting it. And one day, the rent always comes due. Comfort is the new poverty. Most people don't get trapped because they're dumb. They get trapped because they're comfortable enough not to change. The middle class loves comfort more than truth. They'll complain about inflation, debt, taxes, but not enough to actually do anything about it. They want security, not freedom. Security feels warm. Freedom feels uncertain. So they pick the sofa over the struggle. I've seen it 1,000 times. A man earns $50,000 a year. He says, when I hit 100,000, I'll start saving. He hits 100,000 and suddenly life got more expensive. Then he says, when I hit 200,000, I'll finally invest. By then he's 45, tired, and still broke. The problem isn't his income. It's his thermostat. Every time it warms up, he resets comfort to a higher level. He thinks progress means owning more stuff. But the more you own, the more you owe in time, attention, and energy. Every new gadget, every new subscription, every new upgrade, they don't just cost money, they cost focus. And focus is the real capital of a rational mind. You can't think independently when your head is full of noise. You can't build wealth when you're addicted to convenience. The middle class has built an economy around their own laziness. They pay for fast food because cooking takes effort. They pay for streaming because boredom feels unbearable. They pay for convenience delivery because planning ahead feels like work. They don't see it as laziness, they call it self-care. Meanwhile, every swipe, every click, every order funnels money to people who understand how comfort destroys discipline. Capitalism doesn't punish stupidity. It monetizes it. If you make comfort your goal, someone smarter will sell it to you at a premium. People love to talk about passive income, but the truth is they're the passive income. They work, consume, and repeat. The machine runs beautifully, just not for them. The middle class wants wealth without inconvenience. They want to save without sacrifice, invest without risk, learn without discomfort. That's like wanting to lose weight without hunger. I've spent my life watching people underestimate the cost of comfort. Comfort turns sharp minds into dull ones. It teaches you to tolerate mediocrity, to rationalize stagnation. When you're too comfortable, you stop asking what could be better. And when you stop asking that, life quietly passes you by. You see, discomfort is the seed of growth. Every good decision I ever made started from irritation. I was irritated by ignorance, by waste, by stupidity. That irritation forced me to learn, to adapt, to move. The middle class calls discomfort stress, and they medicate it, avoid it, and outsource it. The rich call discomfort tuition. It's what you pay to get smarter. If you can't stand a little temporary pain, you'll end up with permanent regret. The irony? The middle class will endure 30 years of job anxiety, debt pressure, and financial stress, all to avoid 6 months of disciplined sacrifice. That's comfort addiction at its finest. They'll stay in jobs they hate, neighborhoods they can't afford, and habits that slowly bleed them dry. Not because they're trapped, but because they've mistaken comfort for happiness. I've learned that comfort is not a goal. It's a narcotic. Taken too long, it dulls your ambition, and once it does, the market doesn't need to defeat you. You'll do it yourself. So if you want to stop being broke, start being uncomfortable on purpose. Read things you don't understand. Cut expenses that make you feel safe. Invest in something that scares you a little, because the more you chase comfort, the more it costs you, and not just in dollars. It costs you the one thing that compounds faster than money: character. And without character, no fortune can save you from yourself. The middle class doesn't just want to live well. They want to look like they live better than everyone else. That's the trap. The quiet poison called status. Most people don't buy a car. They buy attention. They don't buy a house. They buy approval. And that's why they'll always be poor. They're trying to purchase self-worth from people who don't care. When I was young, nobody cared if you wore an expensive watch. If you had one, it meant you were probably late to something important. Today, it's a personality. I see people earning $50,000, wearing $10,000 on their wrist, and financing the other 40 through a smiling salesman. They call it motivation. I call it insanity. The middle class lives by this unspoken rule: if I can look rich, maybe someday I'll feel rich. It never works that way. You can't buy confidence with consumption. You can't fill an empty ego with a new gadget. I've met billionaires who drive old cars and live in modest homes. Not because they're cheap, because they're free. They don't need to prove anything. And that's exactly why they stay rich.